was Joan of Arc really? A peasant girl or a royal princess? Hey there, folks! Today I want to chat with you about Joan of Arc, you know, the famous Maid of Orleans who's a big deal in French history. Growing up, I always thought of her as this simple farm girl who heard voices and went off to save France. But the more I dug into her story, the more I started wondering, is that really the whole picture? Her life is full of mysteries that most people don't even think about. So, grab a coffee or a soda, if that's your thing, and let's dive in. I'll share what I've found, toss in some of my own thoughts, and maybe by the end, you'll see Joan a little differently too. First up, who were her parents? The history books tell us Joan was born in a tiny village called Domremy, somewhere in Lorraine, France, to a poor farmer named Jacques d'Arc and his wife, Isabella. They say it was around 1409, or maybe 1412, nobody's really sure. But here's the kicker, there's no solid proof of any of this. No birth certificate, no old family Bible, nothing. It's just a story that's been passed down. Makes you wonder, right? What if it's not the real deal? Even weirder, Joan herself said at her trial that she didn't have a last name. She called herself Joan the Virgin, and back when she was a kid, folks knew her as Jeanette. Check this out, in all the old documents from her time, nobody calls her Joan d'Arc. She's Lady Joan, Joan the Virgin, the Maid of France, or get this, the Maid of Orleans, before she even saved Orleans. That's a big clue. And here's another thing. The future king, Charles VII, gave her a coat of arms, but it's got zero connection to the d'Arc family. It looks more like something you'd give to someone from a fancy, high-class background. So, was she really just a farmer's daughter? Money, smarts, and some serious skills. Here's where it gets wild. Joan never seemed to worry about cash. She'd tell her buddies, whenever my piggy bank's empty, the king fills it back up. Excuse me. Does that sound like something a dirt poor peasant girl would say? I don't know about you, but I don't picture a farmer's kid getting direct deposits from the royal treasury. Then there's this guy, Alain Chartier. He was like the personal assistant to two kings, Charles VI and Charles VII. He said Joan wasn't raised tending sheep in the sticks. Nope, she grew up around high society, went to school, and knew her stuff. Educated? From a village? That's like saying a kid from a one-stoplight town in Kansas was secretly attending Harvard. When Joan showed up in Chinon to meet Charles VII, the guy who'd later be king, she blew everyone away. She rode horses like she was born in the saddle, handled a sword and lance like a pro, and even played these fancy noble games, like quintin or ring tilting, that only rich folks knew. Picture an 18-year-old girl from the middle of nowhere pulling off moves like a medieval Olympian and hanging out with the upper crust like it's no big deal. That doesn't scream farm girl to me, it's more like she stepped out of a castle. Could she be royalty? Now, here's the juicy part. Some folks who've studied this think Joan wasn't a peasant at all, she might have been royal. The theory goes that her real parents were Queen Isabella of Bavaria, wife of the nutty King Charles VI, and her lover, Louis, Duke of Orleans, who was the king's younger brother. Yep, Joan could have been their secret love child, handed off to the d'Arc family to keep things hush-hush. If that's true, a lot starts making sense. Why was she treated like a VIP at court? Why did she always have money? Why did she act so chill around the future king and his cousins? Get this, when she met Charles VII in Chinon, she plopped down right next to him like, no hesitation. Only someone with royal blood could pull that off. And when this young Duke, Alencon, walked in, she casually asked, "Who's this guy?" Charles said, "Oh, that's my cousin, Alencon." Joan just smiled and said, "Welcome aboard. The more of us with French blood, the better." That's not how a farm girl talks, that's princess energy right there. Oh, and her nickname, Maid of Orleans. It might not be about her big win at Orleans. Some say it's a nod to her dad, Louis of Orleans, from the moment she was born. Pretty cool theory, huh? A quick history lesson. France back then. To get why this matters, let's rewind to what France was like in Joan's day. It's the early 1400s, and the country's a mess. They're stuck in the 100 Years' War with England. Think of it like a medieval Super Bowl rivalry that lasted over a century, starting back in 1337. England wanted to take over the French throne, and France was fighting tooth and nail to stop them. But inside France, it was chaos too. The nobles were bickering over power, and King Charles VI, nicknamed the Mad, wasn't exactly running the show. He'd lost it years earlier, like in 1392 when he freaked out and attacked his own knights, thinking they were out to get him. His wife, Isabella, and a bunch of lords ended up calling the shots. Isabella was sharp but had a reputation. People whispered she was hooking up with Louis of Orleans, the king's charming, ambitious brother. Louis was a big player, loved fancy stuff, fought the English, and had his eye on power. He got whacked in 1407 by the Duke of Burgundy's orders, but the rumors about him and Isabella didn't die. If Joan was their kid, she came into the world right in the middle of this royal soap opera. France's economy was tanking too. The war trashed villages, taxes crushed regular folks, and cities like Orleans were under siege. So when Joan showed up in 1429, rallied the troops, and freed Orleans, it was like a miracle, or was it? Maybe someone behind the scenes knew who she really was. Vatican secrets and a royal cover-up. Fast forward to 1934. A Catholic historian named Edward Schneider was poking around the Vatican library and stumbled on something called the Book of Poitiers. It's a record of questions a church panel asked Joan in 1429, plus her answers. The church didn't buy her story about hearing voices or being sent by God. So, the king sent two monks to dig deeper. Their report: Joan was the daughter of Isabella of Bavaria and Louis of Orleans. Schneider, a devout guy and buddy of Pope Pius XI, later told friends he was sworn to secrecy. Why? Because if this got out, it'd blow up the fairy tale of the holy peasant girl. Plus, it'd mean Charles VII, the king Joan helped crown, was a bastard too, born from Isabella and Louis, not Charles VI. That'd be a royal PR disaster. So maybe that's why they spun this tale about a poor girl with voices in her head. What about her death? Okay, now let's talk about how Joan supposedly died or didn't. The official story says she was burned at the stake in Rouen on May 30th, 1431. But hold up, some old writings say otherwise. An Englishman named William Caxton, born in 1422, wrote in his Chronicle of England that Joan was still in prison 9 months after her execution. And in the diary of a Parisian citizen, some monk claimed she backed off her wild ideas, got sentenced to 4 years in jail, but was treated like a lady, not a prisoner. There's even talk that they burned someone else instead, put a hood over her head so no one could tell. Meanwhile, the real Joan might have been chilling in a cushy lockup until 1432, then let go. What happened after that? Nobody knows for sure. Some say she lived on quietly, others even wonder if she was secretly a guy. That's a whole other rabbit hole.